Hi everyone, how are you? I hope you're fine. Well, last session, if you remember, we had a listening about driverless cars and we learned how they operate using radar and lidar. Although sometimes they are reported to be malfunctioning, such as the accidents occurred in Arizona and Florida, their security in most cases outweigh that of normal cars. And well, today we are going to talk about grammar, which is about if and whether. Let's go to the book on page 23. All right. In order to differentiate between if and whether and have a better understanding of their uses, let's go to the grammar box on page, I suppose, 40. Yes. And learn about them more. Grammar bank, language bank, okay. So, uses of if. As you know, we use if more commonly in conditional sentences of different types. These conditional sentences can express real situations, unreal situations, or imaginary situations. For example, I usually make a sandwich to take to work if I have enough time. That's a real situation and real condition. B, if you don't book now, you won't get good tickets. Again, that's a real situation. C, they'd have gotten the job done quicker if they'd had more people working on it. This is conditional type 3, which is an imaginary or imagined situation about past. And D, if Dad were here, he would know what to do. So this is a second type of conditionals, which expresses unreal situation about present time. Well, second use of if is with reported speeches, reported questions, indirect questions. For example, do you like dogs? If you want to report it, I asked if she liked dogs. F, are you leaving now or are you staying for a bit longer? He asked if I was leaving now or staying for a bit longer. You know all about it, you've studied all of these functions before. Also, we can use if to have a polite request, to introduce a polite request, such as the sentence, if you'll just tell Julie that her next client is here. If here is, let's say, a short form of, can you tell Julie that? Or J, if you would like to follow me. It means please follow me. Well, next page talks about different uses of whether. We can use whether to report questions as well. For example, are you tired? They asked me whether or if I was tired. Do the uh, do the rooms have a shower or not? I wanted to find out whether or if the rooms have a shower or not. The second example, example B, is asked in order to find out something. And sometimes we want to express it in an indirect or a polite way. So in this case, we don't need to have a shift in tense of the verb. As you see in example or sentence D, I want to find out whether or if the rooms have a shower or not. There is no verb tense shift here. Okay, and next part. I can't decide whether to paint the wall green or blue, or to paint the wall blue. We use whether or to introduce a clause giving two options or alternatives. So there is a point here. In the sentence, I can't decide whether to paint the wall green or blue, we have got two verbs, decide and paint, the subject of which is the same, I. In this case, when the subject of the main idea, main clause, is the same as the subject of a whether clause, we can use whether to plus infinitive or whether plus a subordinate clause. How? Like this. Look at the example I'm going to put down here. Well, we're not sure whether to stay here for dinner or somewhere else. So, because the verb, the subject of both verbs, being not sure and going somewhere else, is the same, we can use or to stay. The subject of to stay is the same as being not sure. So we can use to stay. Whether to plus infinitive. As you see, there is no other subject. We can also express the same meaning like we're not sure whether we'll stay here for go somewhere else. So both cases are the same. Both sentences have got the same meaning. There is no difference. But sometimes the subject of both verbs are different. Look at this example. We're not sure whether he'll we're not sure whether he'll stay here for dinner or because in this sentence there are two verbs, one for being not sure and one for stay. We cannot use whether to plus infinitive. We have to use a subordinate clause. What is meant by subordinate clause? He'll stay here for dinner is a subordinate clause. It comes after whether. Our main clause is we are not sure, and he'll stay here for dinner is a subordinate clause. All right. You've got the same thing in the book. Look at example F. She didn't know whether he was laughing or crying. She didn't know whether he was laughing or crying. In this case, only a subordinate clause can be used. We cannot use whether to, like the example sentence in E. We use whether or not, or whether or not, to give an opposite alternative. Look at sentence G. We use the title Ms. rather than Mrs. or Miss when we don't know whether a woman is married or not. So being married and not being married are opposite cases, are opposite situations. Okay? Whether a woman is married or not. We can also say whether or not a woman is married. H. I'm not sure whether or not to go camping this weekend. Whether to go camping this weekend or not. Both are possible. We often use whether or not to mean it's not important if or it doesn't matter if. Example he always said what he thought, whether it was polite or not. It doesn't matter if it was polite or not. Okay, and we can use whether or not in front or end position with this meaning. We use it in orders or commands. What does it mean? Look at the example. Whether you like it or not, you're going to have to look after your sister. It doesn't matter you like it or not. Whether you like it or not, you're going to have to look after your sister. This might be ordered by parents. Example K, you're going to have to look after your sister, whether you like it or not. So this, let's say, clause can occur at the beginning of the sentence or at the end of a sentence. It doesn't matter. So we have to see where it is more effective, more impressive. Well, page 42 also talks about if or whether. So we talked about the uses of whether and the uses of if. Now, let's see how we can use them interchangeably or not interchangeably. We have to use one of them. Normally, when we can use if with the same meaning as whether, both of them are possible to use. But there are sometimes some cases in which we have to use only whether, not if. For example, the first part, we can use if or whether to report indirect yes-no questions and questions with or. If is more common than whether. We talked about it before. For example, A. Call the bakeries around town and find out if any of them sell raspberry pies. A. B. I called Peter from the station and asked if I could drop in to see him before going back or if he'd meet me. Drop in means stop by, to pay a quick visit to somebody. C. The teachers will be asked whether they would recommend the book to their classes. We can also use if. But in formal situations, we better use whether rather than if. We prefer whether or not when there is more than one alternative in the indirect questions. After the election, we ask whether the parties should change their leaders, their policies, or both. There are more than one alternative, and we tend to use whether rather than if. To express an alternative, we can use or not with if and whether, but there is difference. With whether, you can use or not immediately after whether, or postpone it to the end of the sentence. But this is not the case with if. We can say if or not. With if, it should go to the end. Look at the examples. E. I called Bill to find out whether or not he really went to Afghanistan. F. I called Bill to find out whether he really went to Afghanistan or not. G. I called Bill to find out if he really went to Afghanistan or not. So when you use if, know that, bear in mind that we cannot use or not immediately after if. So next part, we use whether and not if after prepositions. After prepositions. For example, I argued with the doctor about whether I had hit my head since I couldn't remember feeling it. About whether, about if is not possible. I. The police seemed mainly interested in whether there were any locks on the windows. Interested in whether. Let me give more examples with this. I'm confused as to whether academic studies will be useful for my future progression or future prosperity. I'm confused as to whether academic studies will be useful for my future prosperity. Or we haven't received an update on whether the party is called off. Let me write them down. I'm confused as to means concerning, about. I'm confused as to whether academic studies will be useful for future prosperity. As to is our preposition, and then we need to use whether. The other example, we haven't received an update when you receive an update on something, it means you get the latest news about something. Update on whether the party is called off. Call off means cancel. Whether the party is cancelled. On is the preposition, and then you need to use whether. Okay? Well, let's move on. We use whether, not if, before two infinitives. J, to buy is an infinitive. Look at the example. I don't know whether to buy the blue one or the red one. We cannot say if to buy. Never ever. K, can you tell me whether or not you're interested in the job? This is about the fact that we use whether, not if, directly before or not. We talked about it before. However, if or not structure is possible, provided that you take or not phrase to the end of the sentence. Okay? So, let's get back to our grammar part on page 23. Okay, so the explanations are the same. Let's just have a look at them and read the examples. We can use if or whether to say that two possibilities have been talked about, or to say that people are not sure about something. They couldn't decide whether or if it was worth retaking the exam. They couldn't decide whether or if it was worth retaking the exam. I doubt whether or if anyone else agrees with me. Whether can usually be followed directly by or not, while if cannot be followed by or not immediately. I didn't know if Tom was coming or not. I didn't know whether or not Tom was coming. Or I didn't know whether Tom was coming or not. We prefer whether rather than if. After the verbs advise, consider, discuss, you should consider carefully whether the car you are interested in is good value. We can have more verbs alike. For example, talk about, think about, choose, or depend on. After these verbs, we prefer whether rather than if. Before to infinitive and after prepositions. We talked about them in a language bank. I couldn't decide whether to buy apples or bananas. We argued about whether women are more liberated in Britain or the US. After about, whether, because it is preposition. And in first example, whether to buy, because to buy is an infinitive, is to infinitive, we use whether, not if. In a clause acting as a subject or a complement, whether the minister will quit over the issue remains to be seen. So, the subject of this sentence is whether the minister will quit over the issue. It is a subject of the verb remains. What remains to be seen? Whether the minister will quit over the issue remains to be seen. In this case, we use whether. Or as a complement. The first issue is whether he knew he was committing a crime. Our verb is, and the verb is a linking verb. And after linking verbs, we use complements. Whether he knew he was committing a crime is our complement. In the pattern, noun plus as to plus whether to mean about or concerning. As to means about or concerning. There was some disagreement as to whether he was eligible to play for France. There was some disagreement as to whether he was eligible to play for France. Okay, let's have a couple of other examples for this use of whether. For example, I was suspicious as to whether the deadly virus would stop taking people's lives. I was suspicious as to whether the deadly virus would stop taking people's lives. Or, it is not a question as to whether there were enough financial support. There was enough financial support for the project. It is not a question as to whether there was enough financial support for the project. Other nouns commonly used in this pattern are debate, discussion, doubt, question, and uncertainty. Well, macro practice. Write whether or if in these sentences. In some, both can be correct. Number 1. When I saw his face, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Why whether? Only because of to laugh. It is an infinitive verb. And we can use whether, not if, in these cases. Number 2, it was too dark to tell whether or if she was awake or asleep. It was too dark to tell whether or if she was awake or asleep. Number 3, whether they continue to work for us depends on how much we can pay. So why just whether? Because whether they continue to work for us is the subject of the verb depends on. Whether they continue to work for us depends on how much we can pay. Number 4, it remains to be seen whether or if he can win in a major competition. It remains to be seen whether or if he can win in a major competition. Number 5. Sorry. She couldn't make up her mind about whether Jack had stolen the money. Only whether, because whether follows a subject. A preposition. About is a preposition. She couldn't make up her mind about whether Jack had stolen the money. About is a preposition, and we can only use whether. Number 6. Do you have any idea whether or if Ken will be at the meeting? Both of them are possible. Do you have any idea whether or if Ken will be at the meeting? Number 7. There was considerable debate as to whether chess was a game or a sport. There was considerable debate as to whether chess was a game or a sport. Well, I agree with you that this is quite complicated, a bit tricky, and it is not easily understandable. That's why you have to study a lot. You have to produce a lot of sentences. You have to find more about whether or if, especially whether in other grammar sources. Uh, you can find a variety of sentences down on the internet. Try to make a lot of sentences. You can ask a teacher with whom you are working to see if your sentences are correct. And okay, let's move on to next page. That is page 24. Reading and speaking. Look at the table below and try to learn the forms and meanings. Full words are these. I'm reading you. Please take a listen and pay attention to the pronunciation of the words. Generate, generate, generator, generator, generative, generative, generatively, generatively. So, generate means to create, to produce, to cause something. Generator is a machine or a company that produces electricity. It can also be a tool that produces something. Generative means capable of producing something. Generative. Generatively, productively. Okay. For example, generate. The new development will generate 1,500 new jobs. The new development will generate 1,500 new jobs. Produce, cause. Generator. For example, the hospital's emergency generators are designed to cope with power cuts. The hospital's emergency generators are designed to cope with power cuts. Generative, which means productive. Because brain is a generative organ, it is able to produce many of the necessary hormones needed for bodily function. Because brain is a generative organ, is a productive organ, it is able to produce many of the necessary hormones needed for bodily function. Next words. There is no verb for this. Noun is abundance, abundance, which means a large quantity, abundance. Abundant, abundant is adjective, which means plenty, plentiful, plentiful, or ample, ample, rich. And abundantly is the adverb, means in large quantity, in large quantity. For example, for abundance, there was an abundance of food at the meeting, at the wedding, for example. There was an abundance of food at the meeting or at the wedding. Abundance. There is abundant evidence that cars have a harmful effect on the environment. There is abundant evidence, plentiful evidence that cars have a harmful effect on the environment. Abundantly. The plant grows abundantly in woodland. Next part, scarcity, scarcity, which is opposite of abundance, scarce, opposite of abundance, scarcely has got also a different meaning from abundantly. So, scarcity means shortage, lack, scarce, and scarcely means hardly, barely. For example, the scarcity of skilled workers has ended in producing low-quality goods. The scarcity of skilled workers has ended in producing low-quality goods. Scarce. For example, food and clean water were becoming scarce. Food and clean water were becoming scarce. Scarcely. I was scarcely able to move my arm after the accident. I was barely able to move my arm after the accident. And next row of words is about presume. Presume is the verb presume. Presumption, presumption, noun, presumption. Presumable, presumable, and presumably, presumably. So presume means assume, think, suppose. Presumption, presumption is a belief that you think is true, is a belief that you think is true. It can also mean the act of presuming something that is true. And presumable means probable, acceptable as a belief, for example. And presumably means supposedly, apparently, seemingly, allegedly, and so on. For example, for presume, I presume that they are not coming since they haven't replied to the invitation. I presume that is also optional here. I presume that they are not coming, or I presume they are not coming. Presumption. There is no scientific evidence to support such presumptions about aliens. Presumable. He claims to be happy about his promotion, but he can't be happy about the presumable drop in his salary, the probable drop in his salary. And presumably, they can presumably afford to buy a bigger apartment. They can apparently afford to buy a bigger apartment. Well, part 4b. In the following sentences, use the correct form of the words provided. Check your answers with a partner before sharing them with your class. So, presume. 1. On the presumption that the doctor knows best, I took the medicine. On the presumption that. Number 2, we must presume innocence until we have evidence of guilt. We need verb here. We must presume innocence until we have evidence of guilt. Number 3, it's raining, which presumably means that your soccer match will be cancelled. Which presumably means that. Number 4, was it not presumable that he had slipped his foot and had fallen? Was it not presumable that he had slipped his foot and had fallen? Next word, abundant. 1. The quality the team possessed in abundance was fighting spirit. One quality the team possessed in abundance means uh, abundantly, was fighting spirit. Number two, during the 18th century, land was cheap, grain was plentiful, and meat was abundant. Number three, lavender will grow abundantly with little water. Lavender is a kind of plant. We, we call it in Persian ostochotus, whatever. Lavender will grow abundantly with little water. Next word is scarce. After the war, food and clothing were scarce. Number two, the scarcity of medical supplies was becoming critical. Number three, he had scarcely sat down when there was a knock at the door. He had scarcely sat down means he hadn't sat down yet. He wanted to sit down. And next one, generates. Knowledge gained from research is often dynamic and generative. Adjective form. Knowledge gained from research is often dynamic and generative, productive. Number two, the computer industry has generated hundreds of new jobs in the area. Number three, in this phase, the most active generators of ideas were sociologists and psychologists. In this phase, the most active generators of ideas were sociologists and psychologists. Alright, let's go to part 4C. Match the words 1 through 11 with the meanings A through K. Okay, first I'm going to read the words for the sake of pronunciation, so please pay attention how the words are pronounced. Then I'm going to match them with their meanings. 1. Advent. 1. Advent. Advent. 2. Scale. Scale. 3. Mimic. Mimic. 4. Optimize. Optimize. 5. Biomass. Biomass. 4. 5. Biomass. Biomass. 6. Instantaneously. Instantaneously. 7. Replicate. Replicate. 8. Harness. Harness. 9. Commodity. Commodity. 10. Hoard. Hoard. 11. Tinker. Tinker. Well, Advent matches K, coming, the time when something first begins to be used. You can say appearance or emergence. So Advent, K, coming, it can mean appearance of something, emergence of something. Number 2, scale. The meaning is A, the size or level. Number 3, mimic, is I, imitate, copy, or the way somebody speaks or behaves. We can say take off. 4, optimize, matches with the definition. D, improve for money, improve for more efficiency. Improve for more efficiency. We can say get the most of something, use best, or to perfect. Biomass is B, plant and animal matter used to provide power or energy. We can say organic fuel. And next one on the list is instantaneously. Instantaneously, J, immediately, at once, without delay, I don't know, promptly, instantly, in a flash. Number 7, replicate. Replicate is E, do something again or try to get the same result again. Do something again or try to get the same result again. We can say duplicate or reduplicate, copy, double, reproduce. Number 8, harness. Harness matches F, to control and use the natural force or power of something. We can say control, we can say exploit, utilize, use, make use of. Number 9, commodity is G, a product that is bought or sold. It's an item, it's a product, material, it's an object or thing. And number 10, hoard. Hoard or hoard up. It matches H, collect and save large amounts of something. We can say accumulate or store up. And finally, 11 is tinker, which is mostly used with the preposition with, tinker with. The meaning is C, make small changes to repair something or make it work better, to improve, to modify something. Well, next page, part 4D. Use the correct form of the words in exercise 4C to complete these sentences. Number 1. Other scientists were unable to replicate the experiment. To replicate the experiment. You know, they couldn't make the same, or they couldn't produce the same result. Number 2. Europe should not try to mimic Japan. We have to find our own path to successful modernization. So, number 3, Congress has been tinkering with legislation. Congress, you know, is kind of parliament. Has been tinkering with the legislation, or to legislate means to make a law about something. So when we say Congress has been tinkering with, they have been working on the laws in order to improve them. Number 4, we can harness the power of the wind to generate electricity. We can harness the power of wind to generate electricity. Number 5, consumers began to find that they could afford more expensive commodities. Consumers began to find that they could afford more expensive commodities. Number 6, there has been housing development on a massive scale since 1980. Massive scale. Massive means huge. Number 7, death from a massive heart attack happens almost instantaneously, happens almost immediately. Number 8, at the same time, the nature of this economy means that Number 8, at the same time, the nature of this economy means that processes become impossible to optimize. Number 9, in less developed nations, power from burning biomass is also important locally. Number 10, many more people died of infections before the advent of penicillin, before the emergence of, before the coming of penicillin. They have been hoarding food and water, convinced that some kind of catastrophe is coming. They have been hoarding food and water, convinced that some kind of catastrophe is coming. Catastrophe means disaster. Convinced, you're feeling certain. And so hoarding means something like ihtikar kardan in our language. Well, let's finish it here. Next time we will start with a short talk about the changes that technology made in our life, and we will have a reading. So, thank you very much, and goodbye for now.